my name is Avery Zweig,
And I'm Savannah Hartman.
and this is our presentation on post-traumatic stress disorder as shown by Lieutenant Dan in the movie Forrest Gump.
In this movie, it is centered around the Vietnam War, and Lieutenant Dan is a lieutenant in that war. He was thinking that he wouldn't make it out of the war and that he would die. So he had to watch lots of his fellow soldiers die, and he lost his legs in the war. And these are just really the traumatic event that causes his PTSD.
Yes, so as Savannah mentioned, the war served as the trigger event for him. Per the DSM, which we were told to refer to, he would categorize under A1 and A2 under PTSD because he not only experienced the trauma himself, but would have watched his other soldiers fight and die in that war. His symptoms included negative alterations of cognition and mood associated with the event, feelings of detachment, irritable behavior and angry outbursts, sleep disturbance, and persistent inability to experience positive emotions. Those are per the DSM D2 through D7 and textbook of a PTSD case.
During the time of this movie, it was the Vietnam War, and they weren't even knowledgeable enough to be calling it post traumatic stress disorder. It was called post Vietnam syndrome, and there was just not a lot of information behind the effects of war on your mind and the effects of traumatic events on your mind. And so there just wasn't a lot of help for these veterans, nor was there a lot of information behind it. One thing that's really interesting is that the effect of war is the same across all cultures, whether you're on one side of the battlefield or another. You're still seeing your fellow soldiers die on the battlefield, and you're seeing horrific things. So I think the experience from a soldier's perspective can be the same across cultures, but different cultures have different information based on mental health, and they have different values of mental health, of how important they think it is and how truly affected they think it is by the war. Also, it's really interesting, different time periods have different amounts of knowledge on mental health and trauma and all of these different things. So there's lots of different factors that can make it differ across cultures, but the effect on the soldiers themselves, I think, is the same across all cultures.
Stigmas that were associated with PTSD around this time, as she mentioned, people were uneducated on the effect that war would have on mental health. Prior to the Vietnam War in about 1981, the general consensus was just stick it out and be a man. And it was easier for veterans of World War I and World War II to do this because when they came home, they were treated as heroes, whereas Vietnam was a stark contrast to that because we've learned per the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund that 1/3 of the soldiers that fought in Vietnam were drafted. So not only did they not want to be in Vietnam, but they were not welcomed home as heroes. Rather, they were spit on by our culture because people were opposed to it. So there's very large stigma around this, as well as just a lack of awareness on how to treat it.
One example where Lieutenant Dan shows his PTSD symptoms is one night he wakes up in the middle of the night and he's unable to sleep, and he reaches over and grabs Forrest, the man who saved him from the war, and he's angry with him that he saved him, and he's yelling at him, and he just has these angry outbursts, sleep disturbance, and irritable behavior. And it's just really sad to see that he truly was expecting to die in the war and is like disappointed that he is still alive. But something that's really interesting is that one symptom that he does not have is the avoidance of traumatic events. Like he's not um, scared of loud noises or fireworks, or like he's not avoiding anything. He is just really angry and broken.
The recommended treatment is prolonged exposure therapy. This, along with, oh my goodness. Yes, CBT. CBT is another alternative. They're both equally effective, but we chose prolonged exposure therapy because that would require that he visualizes the event and verbally explains it. Lieutenant Dan is a more action-oriented human, so we thought this would be more effective. Ethically, it could be challenging to force a patient to go through a traumatic event again. But because Lieutenant Dan was not only harming himself but others, as is shown in the movie, because of his PTSD, this would have been a good idea.
Some of the barriers we think that could have happened to Lieutenant Dan getting treatment is we just really don't think that he is the type of person who would have been super receptive to it. And during the time period that this movie was shot, um, it was just not a very well known thing, and it just wasn't a commonly supported thing to have treatment for PTSD. And he is a very stubborn man, and we just don't think that that would have been something he was up for. But we really do love the way that Forrest Gump has portrayed PTSD, because us as college girls, that's not something that we've really been exposed to much in our lives. But it's good to have films out there that show us things that could be outside of our bubble, or just things that we wouldn't naturally experience on our own. And I think this film does a really good job of portraying that. I think it can be a bit dramatized of the way that he has the textbook definition symptoms of PTSD, but I still think it does a really good job.
Yeah, so as she mentioned, accuracy displays the symptoms of PTSD accurately, but is dramatized a little bit with lunacy and errors in decision making for cinematic effect. But overall, it gives a good glimpse into that part of our history and what some veterans would have experienced.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And here is our sources.